The Electoral Commission of South Africa has released its first quarterly report into political party funding. This is in line with the implementation of the Political Party Funding Act, which came into operation in April this year. Newzroom Afrika's Mbali Tetani with us for more.
It's a first for South Africa as the Independent Electoral Commission promotes transparency in the funding of political parties. To date, only 3 political parties have been able to declare donations to the Commission.
These are the African National Congress, ANC, the Democratic Alliance, DA, and Action SA. The ANC and the DA declared individual donations that they received of 10,720,000 rands and 51 rands and 48 cents respectively. So the first coming to the ANC and the second to the DA. Action SA declared total direct donations amounting to 3,305,090 rands and 26 cents.
Political parties are required by the Funding Act to disclose all donations starting at 100,000 rand. Donations cannot exceed 15 million rand in a single financial year. All political parties in South Africa were granted 31 days to compile their reports on donations.
We have sent reminders to all the political parties that are registered with the Commission. You would be aware that this legislation applies to both represented and unrepresented political parties, but all these parties are registered with the Commission. Now, in an event where information comes to the fore, we will, investigate which section of the Act has not been complied with, and the necessary action will be taken based on that.
While South Africa has 504 represented and unrepresented registered political parties, the Commission says 108 responded, saying they have not received donations that needed to be declared. In the meanwhile, 393 political parties did not respond to the IEC's correspondence. As the South African electorate prepares to head to the polls on the 1st of November, the IEC says it understands concerns raised of having an election on a Monday, but says that it needs all the time to prepare for the local government elections. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Mbali Tetani in Centurion.
Now, with municipal elections date set for the 1st of November, will the voters turn up at the polls? Here to talk to us about that, joined by Ilona Tip, Operations Director at the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa. Ilona, good to have you with us tonight on In Focus. It's been said previously that voter turnout certainly tends to be quite low when it comes to local government elections than it is when it comes to national elections. What drives voter turnout?
I think a number of things. First of all, for the national and provincial elections generally, the status of being a member of parliament or a member of a provincial legislature has generally been a higher status. It's regarded, I think, by many people or perceived by many people to be, of a higher status. Whereas local government has always been almost the sort of, the sort of lower rung of getting elections. And for many people, if you want to get into politics, you might want to use the local government as a stepping stone and then go further than that. So that's one of the issues. The other issue, of course, is the issue of trust. If people feel or citizens feel that they have lost trust in the ability of whoever the party is to govern them, or to rather to respond to their aspirations or reflect their aspirations, then they tend not to go to the polls. And there has been an argument, and recently there was the commission that looked into the electoral system of South Africa, and there was talk of putting all 3 elections as local, provincial and national on one day because of the fact that generally the turnout for national and provincial is higher, and in that way it might encourage people to come to the polls and also cast their vote for local government. Local government is also really the level of government that people really feel. You know, it's the level of government that's supposed to deliver services. And we've seen many, many protests that increased over the years at that level where service delivery is poor or it's not adequate, and you know, people lose trust and faith in the fact that whoever is going to govern them, or that they actually have little or no interest in their aspirations and don't reflect their aspirations. So they tend to say, well, what is the point in going to vote if our vote has no value or no worth and it doesn't change our lives?
Yeah. Well, is it a worrisome sign, this shift in voter engagement, particularly when you're talking about democratic health?
I mean, it is a worry because, you know, there is this idiom that says, you know, people get the government they deserve. So if people don't go to the polls or have lost faith and trust in the poll or in the ballot as a means to, you know, have an impact on their lives, it is very worrisome, because then it allows the people that are in authority or have been elected at some point, there to make decisions or to do what they like, if one could put it so simply. And it becomes a problem because then they do what they like, as we've seen in especially at municipal level. And the impact on people's day-to-day lives is very severe. You know, if there's no facilities, there's no services, there's no sanitation, there's no infrastructure, it impacts very, very negatively on people's lives, and eventually becomes a spiral where people feel there's no point in my going to the poll, so they don't go to the poll and don't elect people that might well do the job and actually, you know, work and are dedicated to ensuring that the lives of the citizens of this country are improved. And it reinforces the feeling that, well, there's no point in going to the poll because nobody listens to me. Yeah. If you don't, you know, participate in the poll, then the situation just continues, and in fact, it actually just deepens.
Now, you're already saying, I mean, trust in elections was already at a fragile level prior to the pandemic arriving on our shores. What are the implications then for broader participation now that there is a pandemic, and what will that say, or how will that impact on the electoral legitimacy?
Well, exactly. You know, I mean, although there are many countries where the polls are low. I mean, you've had, you know, countries like America where the poll, even except for the last elections, and I think the elections when a few years before that, where you'll get your president being elected by 25 or 30% of the poll. And, you know, we really don't want a situation like that. We want people to go to the polls. You know, the pandemic is certainly a worrisome factor, but, you know, people still continue with their lives. People congregate, people gather. So, you know, I think, I don't know that will reduce the poll so much. And in fact, almost in a way, the fact that we've had the situation now where we've had, first of all, a recommendation that the poll be extended to, by the end of February next year, to the fact that, you know, it's now, there was first some feeling that there'd be no election, now there is an election. It's almost heightened the interest in the elections. Whereas, you know, it wasn't the topic of discussion before and people were not that interested in it. But I think, you know, ironically, what's happened now is that it has come to the fore. It's on the table to be discussed, and people are aware that there is an election. And I think it'd be very interesting to see what the response is, because there is a lot of talk about it. The fact that it's now taking place on the 1st of November, you know, is quite close on the horizon, and it's still a topic. So it may mean that people actually do go to the polls, perhaps a little bit more than we would have thought they would, because it's now something that's topical and people are talking about it a lot. It's on the radio.
Does it matter, though, Ilona, how we're talking about it? Because by and large, the conversation about them right now are around the decisions about the electoral calendar and the processes of the IEC.
I think it look, Yes, does the fact that people are talking about it translate to the fact that people go to the poll and you actually see it in the ballot, and that there's an increase in the number of people who cast their vote? It's difficult to say, but the fact that it's talked about, that it's on the table, that it's a topic, almost creates an interest in it. So yes, I agree with you. It may not translate into votes, but I think it's actually quite interesting, and it might well make an impact in the fact that it's coming up soon, and it's at the forefront of our discussion and people's minds. It is something that they are aware of, whereas, it might have come and gone and not. I think people, and certainly prospective voters, are very interested to see, and certainly political parties are, as to how it will impact. There are, the use of social media, which has been talked about before, and it has its pros and its cons, gives political parties and candidates an opportunity to reach perhaps a wider audience. I mean, you won't have the big mass rallies that you had before, so you'll have a different approach to it. But I do think the fact that it's on the table and discussed, and it excites some interest, I think might have a more positive impact than we would have estimated.
So we're talking, for example, about vaccine coverage in the country, and we're talking about a possibility of having diverse range of mechanisms for people to access vaccines so that I suppose it will somewhat increase their participation. So if I'm in a taxi rank and there is a station for me to vaccinate, I'll probably go there because I'm already standing in a queue. I might as well do it, right? Or if I'm coming out of a shopping center and it's a quick thing, it's not a cumbersome process, I might just think about doing it. How about voting? I mean, if we diversify the range of voting mechanism, could that certainly improve voter turnout?
Look, if you want to go the vaccination route, there are many people who are uncomfortable about it, or in two minds, or they feel ambiguous about it, they don't respond. But, I do think, what also often happens is that a momentum grows. So if people see other people going to a station, which, is different in the past, might have been, you walk down the road and you see somebody walking down the road, so you say, where are you going? I'm going to vote. Okay, I'll come along with you. Whereas you don't have that angle of it now because, people are keeping the distance, they're not joining into a crowd. So, it's not that they're necessarily going to say, okay, well, I'll just go along. But I do think that, it also depends on the trust that people have in the system and the trust that people have in their candidates. And there's been a lot of discussion now, especially with the fact that reopening the registration, reopening the opportunity for candidates and political party independent candidates to register, means that people may well go there. And I think a lot of parties will call on their supporters to come out and say, look, we're giving you an opportunity now. It wasn't going to be there before. You have to show that you are with us on this one, and then come out and vote. So, one is hoping that kind of momentum will grow and it will increase. Generally, as we said, local government has less interest than national elections. But, interestingly, the first local government elections in 2000, which happened just after 1994, just after the 1999 national provincial elections, only had a 48.7% voter turnout. In 2016, although it was distinctly far lower than national elections, you had 57% or 57.94% of voters turning out. So there's been a slight increase over the years, although it still lags behind national elections. But think about it. In 2016, you had 57% of voters voting for local government election. In 2019, you only had 66% of people voting. Now, that is a worry because if people are losing interest in the national and provincial elections, what is going to be their response to local elections in 2021? So it's really a difficult call on this one. I do think that people who want to vote and were intending to vote will come and vote. I think one is only hopeful that the people that had less interest or thought nothing can change might well come out now and say, okay, we've been complaining that, some of our candidates aren't registered, that we haven't been able to get there. Now we've got to come out and show that we will support them because there's an opportunity now for them to actually register for the local government elections and stand for the elections.
Right.
So I think it's going to be a strong call that if we're opening up registration, people must come to the election. And of course, as you know, we have a young population in South Africa, as we do across the continent.
Yeah.
And the really important thing is to actually reach out to those voters and get them to come and vote.
And let's leave it there for tonight. I'm out of time completely, but I appreciate you coming on now. The Operations Director at the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa, Ilona Tip. Let's look at